All right, good afternoon. Glad to have you all show up right after lunch in a security talk. So I hope I can keep you all awake. My name is Casper de Jonge and I'm a senior program manager on the Power BI team. And actually, I've built this deck a while ago because I kind of moved into a new role. I still work on the Power BI team, but I work a lot with customers, large enterprise customers worldwide. And of course, we always get the questions about security. How does this work? How does Power BI secure these things? And of course, we have a very detailed Power BI security white paper, but it is, as I said, it's very detailed, it's very technical. So what I would try to do today is talk about those aspects of Power BI, everything around security, where is data stored, how is it encrypted, how does Microsoft make sure that it is secure, but also around the other aspects, other things that you can do around the Power BI, not just Power BI itself, but all the infrastructure that Power BI uses of Azure to make it even more secure, and all the things and the possibilities that you have there, because there are ton of things you can do with Power BI. As I said, yeah, it's fairly technical, level 300 for sure. And what we're going to talk about today is a few things. First one we're going to talk about is user identity. So who's this user who's connecting to Power BI? And how do we make sure he is who he says he is? And how does this work? The second one, of course, that we talk about is data security. How does Microsoft make sure we secure your data? And the third one is compliance and market availability. There's lots of rules. I think James talked about it a bit in the keynote this morning. FedRAMP, all these things. So what is there with Power BI and some of the things that are coming down the line shortly. And then the last one is very briefly, I'm going to talk about how can you secure your content. Of course, there are some well-known patterns that have already been talked about and shared before, things like row-level security and things like this. I won't cover this in this session today because we won't have too much time for it. But I did a similar webinar a few weeks ago on the Power BI webinar, which is kind of similar to this, where I did cover those things in more details as well. So you can also go watch there. There are also some white papers that actually most of this information is also available in white papers, but I can understand you don't want to go through all these things. But I do have slides in the end that kind of summarizes all the white papers that are interesting and where you can find more about all that content. Okay, so let's start about user identity. So who is a user that connects to Power BI and how do we make sure that we know who it is? The most important thing to remember, is if there's one takeaway you can take away from this session, is that Power BI is part of the larger Microsoft cloud. It all runs on Azure. We run on Azure. Power BI lives and breathes on Azure. So for example, we did not go ahead and implement our own security system. We leverage Azure Active Directory. So if you have already set up an Azure Active Directory in your organization or your customers have already used Azure Active Directory for whatever, it can be Dynamics, it can be Office 365, it can be anything. If Power BI then is getting installed or you go to Power BI for the very first time, you sign up, but you already have AD with all kinds of security settings and things like this, it will automatically be picked up and automatically leveraged. And we'll talk about some examples of this later on. So if you're already using other Office 365 services or Dynamics or things, it will automatically be picked up and synced into the same Azure Active Directory tenant. So this one Azure Active Directory tenant will be used to secure all of your resources with a common set of users and credentials. So if you go to Power BI, you sign up, you don't have to know about this. Maybe your IT guy at one point set it up and you set up federated syncing. So your on-premise Active Directory will automatically be synced up to the Azure cloud. And now these users with the same username and password that they use to log into their machines on their laptops locally on-prem will also be usable for all the cloud content. So Power BI uses Azure Active Directory, and there's no other way except when you build it yourself with Power BI Embedded. We won't go into too much details there, but with Power BI Embedded, you can use your own security system. And then you can do whatever you want, but still you trust service to service under the covers. We're leveraging Azure Active Directory. So when you go to user identity, you can set up your Azure Active Directory in a lot of different ways. How do you manage identities? Do you have a password sync? Do you have also Azure Active Directory on-prem? Well, then you can sync it to the cloud. That's probably the best way, in my mind. But maybe not everyone has Azure Active Directory or Azure Active Directory set up on-prem. So they want to do a password sync between usernames and passwords. Or you want to do federated identity with ADFS or third-party SDS. So it's important to understand how you set it up. But yeah, as I said earlier, if you already have an on-premise Active Directory RDM you can manage, you can set up AD Connect so you only manage it once. So you add a user to your Active Directory on-prem, it automatically gets updated to the Azure Active Directory as well, and then that user can also log into Power BI, no problem. And you don't have to have different sets of credentials, all of these things. Every user can sign up for a free Power BI license. So every user in your AD tenant can sign up to Power BI and gets a free Power BI license, no problems. This can be turned off, though, by the admin, and we'll talk about this in a second. So user entities, again, can be synced up to Azure Active Directory, and every user in Azure Active Directory can get a Power BI license and can be assigned a Power BI license. So how does this work? How does this Power BI authentication flow work? Well, you have a user who goes to a browser and types in www.powerbi.com and says sign in. In that moment in time, we will go to a Azure Traffic Manager, again, leveraging Azure. We go to this Traffic Manager and figure out where you are in the world. So let's say me, I'm in the Netherlands. I go to www.powerbi.com. I click sign in. The Traffic Manager finds, OK, you're in the Netherlands. It tells this to the browser. The browser brings me to a web front end. The web front end will be in the Netherlands. And what it will do is will prompt me the Microsoft login page. And the Microsoft login page is that page you've all seen, right? The Azure Active Directory, and you have to type in your username and password. Again, I recently got a question which is interesting to talk about here as well. You can change, and you can completely change how that page looks like. Today you get a default out-of-the-box page that kind of looks like Microsoft and all those hello and all the different languages. You can completely change it into your corporate account to have your corporate logo as well. You go to Active Directory to change it. It's possible through Active Directory. So you change it once, and for all your services, Office, Power BI, it will look like it's your company login page. But again, so you get this Microsoft login page, then you log in. At that moment, we go to AD, and now we know who you are. You've logged in. And from that moment in time, we know who you are and what your domain is, which is the most important part. And based on your domain, we're going to look up where is your domain situated. My domain is Microsoft.com. Microsoft.com has their Power BI set up here in the US. So from that moment in time, all my traffic will go to the backend service. And the backend service is in the US. So my data, when I actually start interacting with data and with Power BI and with reports and dashboards, will always go to the backend service, wherever it is located. When you log in for the very first time, it goes to a local website, the local web front end, but it never shows you any data. It's only just for logging in. Next time, it goes to the backend. There's a few exceptions where we use the CDN for, again, we're using Azure, is where we have static components, things like JavaScript files or style sheets, things that have nothing to do with your data or anything that has anything to do with you or your corporation, anything that is static files of Power BI itself, we load locally from a CDN close to where you are, where the end user is. Okay, so that's authentication. So a user logs into AD. After you have signed into AD, we actually go to the backend service. That is the backend service where your Power BI tenant has set up. And the Power BI tenant that has set up, again, has to do with when you sign up for the very first time with either Office 365 or Power BI. You choose which country you're from. That moment in time, you've selected where you are located. That's where the backend service will go to from now on. Okay, so we're not talking about data yet. We're just still talking about logging in and knowing who you are. Some of the cool things, and especially when you have some larger enterprise customers, but actually anyone can do this. We have this at Microsoft set up completely as well. But some of the things that are taken for granted these days, it's actually pretty straightforward to implement with Power BI. Things like multi-factor authentication. So I want to, when my user logs in to Power BI, I want to have multi-factor authentication set up. Well, again, it's not a feature of Power BI. You can go to Azure Active Directory and turn on multi-factor authentication. You can do it in two ways. You can go in the admin portal and turn it on in Office 365, or you can go to AD itself. So if you have Office 365 or AD Premium, you can turn this feature on. And now, from this moment in time, everyone who logs into Power BI gets two-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication, it's not just two, but multi, can be enabled in Azure Active Directory or in your on-premise IDP if it supports it. So for example, if you have Azure AD, and we've set this up, have this in Microsoft, you can either get a phone call, you get a text message, there's an authenticator app on your phone that you can install, or you can use whatever your on-premise security system supports. So it's pretty straightforward to configure your Power BI with multi-factor authentication, which I don't think anyone else has this that easily in the world. It's super easy to set up and super easy to configure. But that's not the only thing. The other thing is, for example, and which is super important because we now have a lot of these mobile applications built into the platform, mobile and device app management. So you have secure data sitting in your mobile devices. You want to make sure that whenever your users log into that mobile application, that they get some additional security set up. For example, I don't want my guys to just walk around without a PIN on their phone and have access to all my corporate data. I want to make sure that when they log into Power BI dashboard, they have to set up a PIN. And you can configure it as such to say, whenever someone tries to log in with the Power BI app, in my organization, they have to set up a PIN. Otherwise, they won't log in. We won't allow them. Or you can even do things like you can configure Intune, like for example, you can set it up as such through Intune that you give them devices and you do not allow them to install anything from the App Store. There's companies who want to do this as well. That means you do have to have some apps. So what you then can do is you have a company app portal, and you can put Power BI into that company app portal. So now they still have access to Power BI, but you as the IT admin can decide if they install it or not. And they can do it themselves. Again, completely configurable through Intune. Today we only support Intune, no other third-party security tools. We have been looking at it, and maybe we'll do it at one point, but for now, it's fully supported with Intune only. And this is the one that I like most. This is my favorite feature. This is something called conditional access. And conditional access is a feature of Azure Active Directory. It's actually GA'd like a month ago or something, or it's been a preview for a while. But this is really cool because now you can actually completely configure how security should work when people log into anything Azure Directory, in this case Power BI. For example, you can say, okay, I only want them to log into Power BI when they're in CorpNet. So when they're actually on-premise in my organization, they're actually in the building. Otherwise, they cannot log into Power BI. Or you can tell them, okay, you can control which devices they can use. And it's not just for everyone. You can even say, okay, I want my sales team are the only ones who can log in when they're on the road into Power BI. Anyone else cannot. And things like this, you can configure it really broadly. For example, you can start making combinations of these things. Like, for example, what we have at Microsoft is we have a VPN, of course, to log into our corporate network. And the fact that we are in a VPN gives us enough two-factor authentication that I do not have to, when I go to powerbi.com or sign in, I do not actually have to do another. I don't get a text call, I don't get anything, because the fact that I'm already connected to a VPN when I log into my corporate account is already two factors. I have my username and password, I'm on my laptop, and I'm connected to VPN, so that's configured as two-factor authentications. But if I'm not connected to my VPN, and I'm outside of the corporate network, then I get two-factor authentication. So you can write pretty complex and interesting schedules, combinations to set up this user access control. And again, this is a feature of Azure Active Directory. It's really interesting. People have been asking about this for BI for a long time, of course. But again, because we are built on Azure, built on Azure Active Directory, there's nothing really that Power BI team has to do. We just leverage whatever they have. But it is really interesting to know and to understand that you can actually leverage all of this stuff. All right. So conditional access, again, is one of my favorites. Now, the next thing, which is also really interesting, is we have also, this is not necessarily sign up, but again, it's like more like a gray line. We also have admin controls of Power BI. And again, probably you guys, just like me, don't have access to the admin controls. Because even in Microsoft ourselves, even though I'm on the Power BI team, I don't have access to the admin controls of our own Power BI tenant because that's IT who controls it. So I never get to see them. I never know what's actually there. So there's a way, I have my own tenant that I've set up to actually where I can play with this stuff, and you can do this as well. There's a blog, there's an article in the Power BI help pages that actually tells you how you can go through and setting up your own tenant to test, so you can actually see what the admin controls. I'll show you in a second. Because of that reason, no one usually has access to these things. But there's lots of admin controls that are available inside of Power BI to even control this more. One thing you can for sure do yourself is, for example, today, Power BI, we want everyone to go to powerbi.com and sign up. And you get a free license, and you can do, you can create dashboards, you can do all these things. But some companies say, okay, I do not want my end users to just go to powerbi.com and just start doing data. I want to be the one in control. So you can actually go ahead, and there, again, there's a support document on this, on how you can turn it off. You can turn off self-service sign-up. This is, again, shared between Office 365 and Power BI. So if you turn it off for one, it also gets turned off for the other. But that means that they cannot sign up to Power BI. Then you can add them manually. So you can say, okay, this user and this user. I've actually seen companies, because we're actually using Office 365 APIs, I've actually seen companies do is build their own web form internally inside of their, as an intranet app, where they want people to go to if they want to have access to Power BI. They go there, they type in the reason why they want to have Power BI and all these things. Then they say, yeah, okay, I want to get access. What they do is they log it, and then they assign a license through code to that user, a free license, and then they can go ahead and use Power BI. But they add this additional step, instead of going to Power BI and signing up, that they have to go get a reason and approval, all of these things. But just through a simple web portal that they create internally. And again, because they're all APIs created by Office 365 that we are leveraging, you can just reuse that. Okay, so that's one part of it. But the other part is the fine-grained admin controls. Things like, okay, I can go into my Power BI admin portal and say, who can share content? Who can export data? Who can create content? And this is a feature area that we're adding more and more and more, and you've pretty recently seen we've added a bunch more there, and we're adding more and more fine-grained controls there. We want to add things like, okay, I wanted to control who can install a gateway in my organization. Like today, everyone can install a gateway, but then we want to be able to control who can actually install a gateway and things like this. We're adding more and more like this. So with that, let's go ahead and take a quick look at the admin controls, because again, probably most of you don't have access to this, and it would be good to see what's there. Okay, so again, I have a simple Power BI dashboard here, a simple human resource sample, and what I can do is actually I can go in here and click on Admin Portal, pretty straightforward. That will bring me to the Power BI Admin Portal, and the Power BI Admin Portal shows me a few things. It shows me usage metrics. So, okay, how many, and again, this is a fake tenant that I set up and created, and we use it, it's actually used for the keynote this morning, so they warned me not to change too much. You can see some of the things here. It's like you can see the number of user dashboards that are created, how many user reports, how many user dashboards, what are the top users with most dashboards, information about who's using the data. And again, we want to extend this further and further and further, so that you, as an admin of the Power BI group, can actually see how to use this inside of your organization. Today, a lot of people use the auditing features, and I'll talk about this in a second, to extract the data and create a new Power BI dashboard report on top of it to get more insight into who's using Power BI. But auditing is meant for auditing, not necessarily to see what the usage is. So we want to be able to give you most functionality in here easily so you can see who's doing what. So again, this is mostly to be able to track usage. And I'll show you a new feature that is just shipped in a second as well. The other thing that you can do is users. Again, user management is shared with Office 365. You do not have to have any Office 365 licenses even to use this. Even when you don't have any Office 365, we'll still share this with them. We just are lazy. We don't want to build user UI if we can leverage it anywhere else. So we rather focus on charts and dashboards than on adding users. So I'm not going to show this, it's a bit too boring. Auditing logs, and this is more interesting. So you can, again, we're leveraging this from Office 365. And you go to the Office 365 Admin Center to actually see the auditing logs. I've already opened it here. And what you can do is you can actually go ahead and set activities. In this case, there are Power BI activities that I've turned on. Let's see, where is it? Already turned it on. Yeah, so you selected Power BI activities, and then you give it a date range, and you search. And then you can see what's going on inside of my organization. So in this case, for example, Siri, this is probably the keynote. This is from last night. They actually viewed a dashboard, and it was this Adam's personal dashboard that he viewed, and he had a data classification that was unspecified, so he didn't have one in anything. And he came from this IP address. And Adam logged in from this IP address, and he looked at this dashboard. And we can go on and on and on, and you see everything what's going on here. So you can see viewing of dashboards, exporting here, exporting Power BI report, visual data, all these things you can see. This is really meant for auditing trail. When you want to know, okay, who's been looking at my data? Did some data leak at one point? And now I can figure out who's doing what, and maybe he's exporting data that he shouldn't be exporting, or maybe he got access that he shouldn't have gotten access, really for this. Because for you to be able to get into this feature, you need to be Power BI admin, you need to be Office 365, so some special rules. I don't know exactly even what they are, but to get in here is pretty hard. So there's a few things that people have been doing, either giving them the rights, or they've set up, because you can automate this. And again, there are some posts in the Power BI support documentation as well, how you can automate exporting data from the auditing log into a SQL Server database, and then again, you can do Power BI dashboards on top of that. So there's people doing that as well. But you can get very fine-grained information on who's doing what here. But again, we hope to get most of this into the usage metrics, so you don't have to do all that work later on. Plus, more interesting things. So this is auditing logs. And again, you can see a lot of these interesting things here. Now, the other one that is really interesting is, of course, tenant settings. And this is more when an IT admin can go in and say, okay, who can share content with external users? In this case, I've disabled it. So in my organization, no one can actually share content with external users. Or I can, of course, enable it. Or I can enable it for specific security groups. So I can say, okay, only the people from the BI org, the BI team, can share content with external people. No one else can do this. But in this case, not change it, because otherwise they're going to be mad at me. Publish to web, another feature that is very interesting, but again, potentially you don't want to give this to your end users, because this allows them to publish data to the web without any security. So anyone can see this data. Maybe you trust your users, maybe you don't. I don't know, but we give you the flexibility to control it. Again, one of the things that we want to do here as well is we also want to turn this on or off for certain groups of people. Today it's all or nothing. We want to change this, but I'm not sure when it's actually happening. Exporting data, we can turn that off as well. So you can right mouse click, export data today. You can turn that off as well. Export to PowerPoint, print dashboards and reports. You can turn that off, so you can turn off printing. Publishing of content packs, creating, asking questions, analyzing Excel with on-premise data sets. Maybe you don't want to allow that either. You can turn that off. Using the ArcGIS maps, global search for Power BI, R visuals, auditing logs. You can turn off or on auditing logs. Actually, I didn't know this, but I was at a big company in Europe, and there are some rules there in certain countries that you cannot use audit logs, because audit logs can be used to figure out how long a person is working during the day, and then if they're working more than 40 hours, they get into different, so some really interesting regulations in Europe that you cannot use audit logs, unless it is, you actually completely get rid of the user who's actually using it, and you anonymize it, and then it's possible again. So interesting stuff. Usage metrics, and we'll talk about this one in a second. But also the other thing you can do is you can do data classifications. So you can add data classifications to your Power BI dashboard, so you can actually go ahead as a content creator, you can actually go ahead and classify data in certain ways. That will then actually show up in your usage reports and your logging files. So you can actually allow them to say, okay, this is high classified information. And then you can go back to your audit logs, the way I just showed you earlier, and then you can actually find highly classified information easily. So you can tag it as such. You can give it your own names, whatever you want to do here. Oh, this is actually new. I haven't even seen this one. Embed content in apps is allowing you to embed Power BI dashboards and reports into SaaS applications. So this is the Power BI embedded. I think this is just released today. But this is for Power BI development. So you can turn off or on that you can actually use Power BI embedding. Oh, it's always exciting with Power BI. New features, even for me. And then, of course, I'm going to discard all. Premium settings. I'm not going to purchase a Power BI Premium here, but you can actually go ahead here and also purchase Power BI Premium. So the other thing that we just released as well is a new feature that allows you, as content creator, not as admin of the Power BI service, but as content creator to see how much your data is used. So I was created over reports and dashboards and things like this, and I want to see how my users are using it. So you can see the thing maybe on the top. It's called usage metrics over here. I can go ahead and click it, and this will, I think I have it. If you click on it here, it actually opens up, and actually you see it's a Power BI report. It actually shows me my usage metrics. So how much is my dashboard being used? And I won't go to, you can go ahead and play with it yourself. It's available right now. But it allows you to show you, okay, how often is it viewed? How many total views? In this case, it's a fake tenant, so it doesn't have much usage. But how many times is it shared? How many unique users? How many total views did it have ranked compared to all my other dashboards? So lots of interesting thing here that you can do and see how your dashboard is being used. And again, this is just the beginning. We want to add more and more and more of these insights into your data itself. So these are all the admin features that you have available already today. All of this is shipped, already is available today. But again, as I said earlier, most of you probably don't have access to this. They're all done by some IT guy who probably never looks at this. So it's probably good for you to know that this is available, so you can go to them and say, hey, I want to have this, this, and this turned on. All right. All right, now the next topic, which is a little bit more technical and a little bit more also interesting. It's all about data security. So how does Microsoft make sure that your data is secure? And again, all of this content is taken from the security white paper. So it's already all described in lots and lots of details there. I try to bubble it up a bit and make it a bit more usable. But all of this is here. And as well, what I usually also tell is, when you have a new security discussion, maybe inside your organization, your CTO, or someone is asking you these questions, please go check if things have been updated. Because if you look at this recording 6 months from now or a year from now, I can tell you things will have changed in that time. And especially in the security area, it's always important to make sure that you always download the latest security white paper, get the latest and greatest information. But this is the current state of things. Of course, before we need to go into look where data is stored, we need to understand what types of data there are inside of Power BI. So the first thing, of course, is we have Power BI. Power BI is a cloud service. Power BI is using Azure Active Directory. We've already seen this. And it's most likely synced to your on-premise Active Directory. But it doesn't have to be, but it's most likely that's the case. Then it has data. Data comes from cloud sources or on-prem, SQL, Oracle, Spark, analysis services, all of these things. They're maybe connected to AD or not. And you use a live connection or refresh schedule. So what are the 3 ways you can access Power BI today? Data. You have data that is imported. So you open a Power BI desktop file, you import data into Power BI. That means that data is now moved to Power BI and is leveraging its in-memory engine. Of course, if you never upload your Power BI desktop file to the cloud, it will never be in Power BI, but the data is inside of the Power BI and data engine. And it uses credentials that need to be saved somewhere to refresh the data. Okay? Then the next thing is we have live data or direct query. Although they're both different things, they act the same. Because there is no data stored, the raw data stays in its original location. So data is not moved to Power BI. There are some exceptions, and we'll talk about this in a second. It uses saved credentials, Or for some scenarios like analysis services, it can actually pass the username of the user who's connecting to Power BI down to the on-premise analysis services as well. So there's no credentials stored in that case. Or we have push data. You can use the APIs to push data into Power BI. In that case, it's stored inside of Power BI because you're pushing the data to Power BI, but it's never refreshed, so there's no credentials there. So those are the three major scenarios and things. So how does Power BI handle data? In general, Power BI handles data in two ways. Data is in process or at rest. When data is in process, it goes between services. It goes through backends and it goes through front ends, but when it goes through a machine and the data is in process and the machine goes down for whatever reason, you will never notice, but that happens because we're a cloud service, so we recycle machines in or out continuously under the covers, and you don't know. But data in process is data that just is in memory, and it just evaporates and it goes away, and it's never stored there. So if the machine refreshes or someone gets access to the machine, it's in process. So that data between Power BI and data sources and other services is always encrypted, always through HTTPS. Depending on the data source, some data may be stored in the service or retrieved just in time. We'll talk about that one in a second. But it's always encrypted. So Power BI in process goes between services, always encrypted, but it's never stored anywhere. Except in some cases when data is at rest, then data gets stored, and we'll talk about this in a second. So what types of data at rest are there? Of course, the data that you imported into Power BI, the data itself is called the data set. That is one part of data that is data at rest. Then the second part is credentials. We have credentials that we need to have to refresh to a data source, to refresh a data source. When you connect to a SQL Azure database, when you connect to whatever in the cloud sources, we need credentials. So it needs to be stored somewhere. The metadata, so the report and the dashboard layout itself. So the way a report looks needs to be stored in the cloud, so it's stored. We'll talk about how it's stored in a second. And the third one, or the fourth one, the last one, is the visual cache. We actually cache dashboards. So even in scenarios when you have live connecting or direct query or things like this, then we have a dashboard that is always cached. You can tune how the dashboard, it's a recent feature that allows you to tune how a dashboard is being cached. You can say, and cache it every 30 minutes, every 5 minutes, every whatever. We also have on the roadmap to turn off the cache completely. Then there's no visual cache, no data stored. But the interesting thing about the visual cache is it just stores the data that is used to render that visual. It doesn't store the entire data set. When you have a single number, it stores one number. When you have a line chart for all months of the year, then it stores 12 times the number and, of course, the month name that you have. So that's the data that's getting stored there. Again, this is more of a performance than a security thing. But if you have row-level security set up, for example, as you can imagine, the cache of the dashboard needs to be for every user who's connecting. Because row-level security, we never know who is the same user. So we now have a dashboard cache for every user who's connecting, which can be potentially a performance issue for your underlying database system when it's direct query or when it's an analysis service, because we now need to refresh caches much more often. When you don't have RLS, we just have one cache for all of it. Okay, so how is all of this stuff cached, data at rest? Where is it stored and how is it encrypted? So let's start with the top one. Azure Analysis Services, on-prem or Azure. Metadata, and I see people taking pictures. The slides will be available after this. All the slides will, and all the sessions will be available, so you can get through these slides yourself as well. But Azure Analysis Service, on-prem or Azure, metadata and visual cache, nothing is stored except a reference to the database in Azure, and that's encrypted. The visual cache is stored in an Azure Blob Storage, and that is encrypted. And we'll talk about how it's encrypted and what the encryption keys are in a second. The credentials are stored in an Azure SQL database, and again, they're encrypted. Data, there's no data stored in that scenario. For analysis services, on-prem or Azure, there's no data stored in Power BI ever. Direct query, it is stored in an Azure Blob Storage, and it's encrypted. When the credentials, there's two different scenarios. You can create this model in the service. In that case, it's stored as part of the connection string, stored in Azure Blob Storage, and again, it's encrypted. When you import it from a Power BI desktop file, that Power BI desktop file with everything that goes with it is stored in an Azure SQL database. Again, it's encrypted. For direct query, again, no data, no raw data is stored inside of the model. Only thing that is stored is the visual cache. For push data is stored in Azure Blob Storage, the metadata and visual cache. There's no credentials for push data. And the data itself is stored in an Azure SQL database. Again, the data there is encrypted. When you import data, ETL/cache data, the data is stored in an Azure, or the metadata/visual cache is stored inside of an Azure Blob Storage, encrypted. When you have credentials, it's stored in different places based on what you have used. If you have Salesforce or OneDrive, the refresh tokens are stored in Azure SQL database. Again, they're encrypted. Refreshing of the data set itself, the credentials are stored in an Azure SQL database, again, encrypted. When you have a data set that's never refreshed, there's nothing stored. Again, the data here is stored in Azure Blob Storage and encrypted. So you see, we mainly have two places where we store data. One is in Azure SQL, and the other one is, of course, in Azure Blob Storage. Now, the most important thing here is, okay, how do you, Microsoft, make sure that when the data is encrypted, no one can get to that data? So how is that data encrypted? So the two scenarios here, the one is the encryption keys to the Azure Blob Storage. Those keys are stored and encrypted in a separate location in the Power BI service. And it's fully managed by an internal Microsoft service. So the keys that are used to encrypt the Azure Blob Storage, no developer inside of Microsoft has access to this. So it's an automated process that actually automatically changes keys, it rotates keys. When new machines get provisioned, and all of this stuff happens automatically, right? When we deploy a new Power BI service every week, new machines get spun up, new code gets installed, and everything needs to have that key to be able to get to the data. And it's not that now we've checked this key into our source code so that anyone who has access to the source code can actually see this key. No, that's not the case. Because it uses this automated service. That automated service is the one who's actually going through and making sure that those keys have been set up. So it's fully managed by this internal Microsoft service. So no engineer can actually get to this. So the encryption keys to Azure Blob are stored into the separate location. Sometimes we get this question, some people want this, is they want to have to bring your own key. Like some other services, especially in Azure, allow you to bring your own key with Power BI so that no one ever will have access. We are thinking about this, but it's a very, very, very expensive work item. So maybe at one point, if you really want this, go vote on the ideas forum. But again, yeah, it's really expensive, so we really need more feedback before we actually start on this journey. Of course, data at rest for SQL Server database, of course, it's easy because, again, we're using the underlying SQL Server TDE encryption. So it's already transparently data encrypted inside the SQL Server engine. So when someone logs in and manages to break into the SQL Azure database and copy the data files from the SQL Server databases, it's still encrypted by SQL Azure itself. So again, these encryption keys for credentials are stored in two different ways. One is the on-premise data source. It's stored in the gateway, and we'll talk about this in a second. When it's a cloud-based data source, it is stored in the data movement role using an Azure SQL encryption. We'll talk about this in a second. So if you look at the whole data storage architecture of Power BI, this is everything that happens under the covers. All the top ones, the blue ones, are at the services that we use in process. So it's used for caching and things like this. Nothing is stored there. But mainly where the data is stored in Azure SQL database and in Azure Blob. And again, Azure Blob uses user-uploaded data, and Azure SQL is used for metadata and /data. Data in Azure has TDE enabled, and Azure Blob data is also encrypted, as we just saw. But again, a user will never interact with those services directly as well. So there are several levels of services in between before we can actually get to that. So a user goes to the Azure API, well, it goes to the UI, of course, but then the UI goes to the Azure API management, that goes to a gateway role, that goes to a presentation role, and that presentation role is the one who actually renders the data through and gets the data from Azure Blob Storage. So it never directly interacts with the Power BI data itself. Okay, so this is how we store data and how we make sure that when someone would get access and hack machines and get access to the Azure Blob Storage, and when you copy the files over, that they cannot actually see your data. So there's lots of stuff happening there as well. And also that Microsoft people, like I'm on the Power BI team, but if I go and manage to find my way into one of those Azure Blob Storages, I still can't do anything with it. I don't have access to any of the keys to decrypt the data. All right. So on-premise data gateway security. And this is another interesting thing. So if you want to have data on-prem, we actually don't store the credentials in the cloud. The data is used an asymmetric key, so it cannot be decrypted in the cloud, because we use the on-premise gateway to connect to your data, right? We don't use anything in the cloud. Only the results from the gateway get sent out back to the Power BI service to actually render the reports. So the way that it works is the credentials are sent to the machine running in the gateway on-premise, where they are decrypted and the data sources are accessed. So you remember when you set up the gateway, you type in this recovery key. Well, that's part of the key that is being used to use the asymmetric key. Of course, to transport the data between Power BI and your on-premise gateway, we use data compression and transport encryption. So the data is also secured between those two services. Of course, it is no longer encrypted in a way that we can see it. It's only between the services. It is transport encrypted, though. All right. Then the other interesting question is, where is my data stored? And again, this is mostly a European question. Me being in Europe, I get this question a lot. Where is my data stored? And you can see this yourself. You can go to Power BI, you click on the question mark, and you click on About Power BI, and you can see where your data is stored. This is that location that I talked to you about earlier. When you sign into Power BI for the first time, you choose where you live. Based on that, this is where your Power BI is getting set up. We always, and this is something that we call data sovereignty, but whenever you have stored your data inside of that area, we will make sure the data never leaves that area. For example, if you choose, you're in Europe, I'm in the Netherlands, that means that my data never leaves Europe. What that means is that my primary data center is set up in the Netherlands. All my data is in the Netherlands. But because we give you, I don't know how many percent uptime, but 99 point something, we want to make sure that we never goes down. Even if the whole data center burns down, we want to make sure you still get to see data. So we have always a backup data center for every Power BI tenant. In this case, the backup data center is in Ireland. But this means that data will never leave that sovereignty, Europe in this case. If I pick Australia, then my data will never leave Australia. So we have Australia Southeast, and then we have a backup location in Australia East, and vice versa. If you pick the UK, who has special rules, then your data will never leave the UK, because we have two data centers in the UK, one in UK West, Cardiff, and one in UK South in London, England. So based on the situation where your data is stored, and again, you can see this, if you click on this link, we have something called the Power BI Trust Center. If you have any questions around this, go there. It actually shows you all of this information in very gory details. And you can also see, like for example, when you have the German cloud, where your data is stored, or all of these things and are showing up there. I think, yeah, so there's lots of different places where we store data. We have China, we have Germany, we have the UK, Europe, US, you name it. But in the data sovereignty on the Power BI Trust Center, which is a great resource anyway to get any of security information, it actually describes in details where your data lives and how it never leaves that. But in general, Power BI will never move data outside of the region that you've picked. So one other thing that I want to talk about briefly, and again, this is a very complicated topic, and we won't go into too much details about this, but some companies do not want any data to traverse the internet. Today, of course, Power BI, I mean, if you log into a browser, you go over the internet, right? But some people say, okay, no, I do not want my data to traverse the internet at all. What we have is something in Azure called ExpressRoute. And ExpressRoute allows you to create a private network connection from your organization to Power BI, or an ISP co-location facility, if you will. And then you can actually completely bypass the internet. So when you log in, or you're inside of your corporate internet, they have a dedicated line to that ISP or to Azure directly. And it never ever goes over the public internet. So this is part of the Azure Express Route functionality. Power BI uses public peering. They have several options there. I'm not an expert on this, but I just wanted to mention it. There are people who want to do this. From what I've heard, it is pretty complex to set up. So if you want to go try this, it is a pretty complicated setup. But some people just need to have it because they don't trust it. But it is an option, again, also for Power BI because we're leveraging the Azure framework. You can go ahead and set it up. Okay. So compliance and market availability, again, lots and lots of rules. James talked about it earlier this morning already. So you see all these compliance things: ISO, HIPAA, EU model clause, data processing terms, PCI, G-Cloud for UK. The two most important ones that I get a lot of questions about is SOX and Sarbanes-Oxley. Those two are in the works and they're coming soon. But as you can imagine, these are very interesting processes that take a lot of paperwork and a lot of time. We're in the middle of those. Yeah, it's coming soon, but it's not in our hands. So we're working through them, and yeah, I expect them to show up not too far off. FedRAMP in the US is pretty important. So all these things are available. Regions, Asia, Pacific, Australia, Brazil, Canada, Europe, India, Japan, UK, United States, even some national clouds, the US government, China, Germany. Again, going back to data locations, if you pick Asia Pacific, data will never leave that region. If you pick Australia, it will never leave that region. Brazil, same thing. So again, when you click on the data locations link here, we'll bring you to the Trust Center and it shows you all that information. All right. So now you've seen how Microsoft makes sure that your data is secure when you give it to us. But there are also some things you can do to secure your data. And some of the things that I wanted to quickly share. So the first thing is that data in your workspace is yours alone. No one else gets access to this. But you can share dashboards with others to see. Not to collaborate or work together. You can share dashboards with other users to see. Of course, now with the new rules, you need to be a pro user to be able to share, and also the receiver needs to be a pro user to share. You can create an app workspace to collaborate with others. So if you have a sales team and you want to work together on the dashboards and reports, you can create an app workspace, and you can work on this together. So you collaborate, creating, editing, viewing, all these things. Then you can distribute these apps for consumption to users inside and outside. You see the asterisk, I'll talk about this in a second. Outside of your organization using AppSource or direct URLs. So you can actually share this, use AppSource, or you can give them a URL directly. And then they can see the apps that Siri showed this morning in the keynote. You can use this app and see the data. The outside of the sharing of your organization, this is a roadmap item. There's a blog post on this by Siri as well about app distribution, which is an interesting read to show you how it works. But there they also talk about this. We're going to again leverage another feature of Active Directory called Azure B2B to be able to share content outside of your organization. This is coming not too far off. They already blogged about it, so I'm safe to talk about it. But you can share it then with users outside of your organization. You can add users from a different domain to your Active Directory domain. Then the security, the credentials are checked by their Active Directory, but you make them part of yours and you give them access as if they are part of your domain. Today, you can share with people outside of your organization already, but they have to be pro users, which is kind of an issue. You have to have Power BI and set it up. Now with this, and together with Premium, you don't have to give them any licenses. You just buy Power BI Premium capacity. Now you can share with, 100,000 users outside of your organization. We don't care. But Azure B2B actually will allow you to do so. And then the last thing is you can secure rows of data with row-level security. So using row-level security, you can actually secure the data directly inside of Power BI as well. So when different users log in to see a report and a dashboard, they will see different data. But again, it's under your control and you can set it up as such. There's lots of interesting documentation and topics about it. So there's lots of more reading. Of course, most of what I showed you and talked about today is written down in the Power BI Security White Paper. We actually just released an updated version of it. The second one is the Power BI Trust Center, where you have A lot of information about data governance, how data is being secured, how do we make sure of all these things. The third one is what I created is a Power BI role-level security cheat sheet. You can download this thing. It's a Power BI desktop file. It actually shows you how to set up dynamic role-level security. You download it. It's a pattern you can follow. It's someone's birthday. It's probably midnight in the Netherlands now, I think. Dynamic white paper, bidirectional cross-filtering, again, important for role-level security. Power BI and Express Route, an interesting topic. Securing the tabular model in Power BI is, again, a new white paper that we've written, but it actually goes into a lot of details on how can you secure your models from modeling perspective. And the last one is the blog post I just talked about earlier about Power BI app distribution. Okay, that's it. We have a few minutes for a bit of questions. If there are any questions, you can come up to the mic.
So you mentioned about the row-level security. So do we have to set up two different sets of users? One set of user is for the user to access the Power BI, and another set of user is to be controlled by the database engine at the row-level security.
So the question is about row-level security. So today, Power BI, you can only use row-level security as defined inside of Power BI. You cannot use security set up in the underlying database system. This is something that is coming, though.
Yeah, but my issue is like I need to expose the access to my users through both Power BI and also Power BI desktop. So
okay. No, yeah. With Power BI desktop, I mean, you have to set up the security. So either when you have row-level security, you can set up the security inside of an Azure an analysis services database. And then when they connect to the analysis services database, they can. Can that be linked together with Power BI? Yeah. Of course, yeah, you can create a Power BI desktop file, you upload it to Power BI servers, and then the same row-level security gets applied. But again, if you need to get them access to the data, then, I mean, you need to have the security defined somewhere. That's the main thing. I think we're out of time, so thank you. I'll be here for questions. So thank you very much for your attention.